In prior lessons, we've seen how to handle authentication, the process of users proving that they are who they say they are, and authorization, the process of users proving that they have permissions to perform whatever operation it is that they are looking to perform. But security doesn't just simply stop there. That there are a few things that we need to take care of behind the scenes to ensure that our environment is in fact safe from attack. And that's exactly what we want to take a look at in this lesson. We want to talk a little bit about our service accounts, which will actually be a bit of review, but since we're talking about behind the scenes security, it's a good opportunity to go back and take another look at all of it. We'll also talk about how to set up certificates and SSL to ensure that our traffic is going to be encrypted. And then we're going to finish it off talking about how we can utilize firewalls and other server components to control network traffic. But let's start off by talking again about our managed accounts. Anything that runs inside of Windows needs to run as an account. Now, the reason that this is in place is so that way we can limit what it is that an account is able to do, and then also help ease auditing overhead. Because if I have an account that's dedicated to just one service, if I go into my audit logs and I see something about that account, then I know that it's talking about that particular service. So we can limit access and we can help ease our auditing pains as well. Now, the catch about separating out our service accounts is that while it does in fact enhance security, there are a couple of downsides. That you are going to notice that there's going to be some additional performance overhead, especially when it comes to SharePoint. Because everything inside of SharePoint is going to run inside of an application pool, and one of the things that IIS is going to do with those application pools in order to ensure that they are truly separated is load up separate copies of all the DLLs that are going to be needed into each application pool. So if I have 3 pools that are going to be running different web applications for SharePoint, I'm going to have 3 separate copies of all of the needed DLLs. Essentially, and this is an oversimplification, but it does have a fair amount of merit, essentially, I will then have 3 separate SharePoint implementations on the exact same box. I really want to be careful about doing that. In addition, this is also going to increase my administrative overhead. That I'm going to have to go in, create the accounts, I'm going to have to go in, potentially configure all the permissions, and then, of course, if we are going to be having those passwords expire, then it's going to be my responsibility, or I'll have to go in and configure this inside the managed accounts inside of SharePoint to go in and manage all of those passwords. So, when applicable, when it's going to be good for your SharePoint security, you want to go in and share your accounts. Now, in order for an account to be used inside of SharePoint, it must be set up as a managed account, and our managed accounts will help ease some of that management. Now, what I'll be able to do when I go to configure a service to use a particular account is just simply choose it from the drop-down, and then as we've already mentioned, the password changing will automatically be handled for me by the managed accounts. Now, some of the typical service accounts that we're going to have in SharePoint, first of all, is the farm account. You're going to be prompted for the farm account on installation, and the couple of very big things that the farm account is going to be used for is it's going to be used by SharePoint to go access the config database. It's going to be the account that's used for the central administration web application, and it's going to be the account that's used for our timer jobs. We'll also typically create one service account. Now, you might decide to create multiple for different purposes. For example, one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later is user profiles. And we want to be able to import data in from maybe some external source to help pre-populate a lot of our users' data. Well, the catch there might very well be that we want to limit what it is that that account is able to do on that external environment. So we might need or might decide to create an account specifically for that. But typically we do want to share our service accounts because for the most part, if somebody goes in and they attack SharePoint and they manage to take over an account, they're going to be able to do quite a bit as it is. Last but not least is a crawl account. The crawl account, which we'll see when we get into search, is going to be the default account used by search to go read data. The big thing about the crawl account is that it only needs read permissions to wherever the data is going to be stored that's going to be crawled. It does not need to have write permissions. Beyond just controlling what it is that our users are able to do inside of SharePoint, we want to make sure that all the communication back and forth between our clients and our servers is going to be encrypted. And this is going to be especially true when we're talking about sensitive data and when we're talking about usernames and passwords. Now, in order to encrypt all of that, we're going to need to utilize SSL, which is going to in turn require that we use certificates. Certificates in SharePoint are going to be used for a couple of different purposes. One of the big reasons that certificates are used is to enable server-to-server communication. Basically, any time that I need one SharePoint environment to talk to another environment, be it another SharePoint environment or some external entity, it basically always requires that we swap certificates, that we obtain a certificate, we send it over to the other side, and then the other side uses that as proof that they are somebody that we can trust. The other very big use for certificates in SharePoint is to enable SSL. Now, what is SSL? Well, chances are you're already familiar with SSL, or at the very least, you're familiar with the most popular use for SSL, and that is to encrypt traffic. Now, don't get me wrong here. Encrypting traffic is extremely important. But the other purpose that SSL serves, which is actually just as important, is to validate or authenticate the server that I'm connecting to. See, here's the thing. SSL is going to encrypt all my traffic going back and forth. So if we have a login page, for example, that's encrypted with SSL, and it was just simply doing the encryption, well then I know that my username and password, when they're sent across the network, is going to be protected. You know what I don't know? Whether or not I actually sent that to the server that I think that I wanted to send that to. That's the other purpose that SSL serves. That SSL, when you see that little lock, or in certain cases when you see the green bar go across your URL box, what that's telling you is that not only is your traffic going to be encrypted, but that we also trust that the server is who it says it is. And that's extremely important. In fact, before you ask your user for any sensitive data whatsoever, you want to make sure that that page is encrypted, so that way the user can send that information across the wire with an assurance that they've connected to the server that they think that they've connected to. Now, in order for me to configure SSL inside of SharePoint, I am going to need to obtain a certificate. And there's a couple of different places that I can get a certificate from. One place that I can get a certificate from is by having the server itself generate that certificate. Now, here's the thing about a privately generated certificate, is that in order for me to trust the certificate and then in turn the server, I need to trust whoever it is that issued the certificate. The common analogy that I always like here is think about a driver's license. That if I need somebody to authenticate to me, what I'm going to ask them for is a driver's license, because I trust that the state who issued that driver's license is going to have done a little bit of validation, that the person who owns it is in fact who they say they are, and that they'll have put in some level of anti-fraud mechanisms so that way I can be assured that it is in fact a valid driver's license, that there's going to be a couple of different things that would tip me off that I'm looking at a fake one as opposed to a real one issued by the state in question. Now, that's typically what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that type of an authority. I'm looking for an authority that we already trust. If we use a privately issued certificate, now it's sort of like a student ID from a college. That I'm not necessarily going to trust that a college is going to go through all the vigorous steps that a state is going to go through before issuing a driver's license. So I'm basically now kind of taking it a little bit on faith, and that's exactly what's going to happen with a privately issued certificate. That when a user goes to a site that has a privately issued certificate, they're going to get a little warning. And that warning is going to say, hey, look, they're giving us a certificate. We don't trust this certificate. This certificate was created by them. Are you sure you want to trust this? So as a result, this really doesn't get me a whole lot of additional security, which is why you only want to utilize privately generated certificates for testing purposes only. Now, if you want to create a certificate, you can do this by utilizing makecert.exe, which is available inside the Windows SDK. But again, this is only going to be useful for testing purposes. The next option that we have is to utilize Active Directory. Now, using Active Directory is a fantastic choice for internal intranet applications. What we're going to do is we're going to configure one server to be our certificate authority, and that's then going to be responsible for issuing all of our certificates. Now, the nice part about having this and done up inside of Active Directory is that I can, through a little bit of magic inside a group policy, configure all the clients inside of my domain to trust that certificate authority. So that way, whenever a user visits a site and that site issues them a certificate that had been issued by our trusted CA, all that the user is going to see is that little lock show up in the URL bar. They're not going to be prompted, hey, do you want to trust this certificate authority? Now, while this is great for internal and is certainly going to save us some money, it's not going to be very helpful for public-facing sites. And this is where a public CA is going to come into play. Now, the nice thing about a public CA is that it's typically going to be trusted by every major browser that your users might be using, and thus it's perfect for public-facing sites because everybody's already going to trust that CA. The catch, however, is that it can be expensive. Because every time that I'm going to need a certificate for a particular domain name that I'm using, I'm going to have to go back out and pay for another certificate. And typically there's also going to be some form of a subscription fee that's going to be associated with that. So this is perfect for public, but if you're going to be doing anything internal, then you just want to use Active Directory certificate services. Now, to configure SSL inside of SharePoint, there's a couple of basic steps that we need to walk through. Step one is to generate or obtain our certificate. Now, how you're going to do that is going to vary, and when I get in to do my demo, I'm going to take a look at how to do this in a couple of different ways. Step two is then to import that certificate into IIS and configure the website in IIS to use that certificate. And then finally, last but not least, is to go into SharePoint and to update the alternate access mapping. Let's take a look at how to generate certificates in a couple of different ways. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a look at how to set up a certificate and SSL for central administration. And I'm going to do this the manual way, where I'm going to go in, generate the request. I'm going to go to my certificate authorities page. I'm going to upload the request. I'm going to download the certificate, and then I'm going to put that into IIS. That's typically how you're going to do things with a public CA. On the flip side, for the second demo, I'm going to go to my intranet site, and I'm going to have IIS automatically contact my domain CA for me and have it generate the certificate. And then what we're going to see is that we'll automatically import that in, and then we'll have to just go in and update the website and update everything inside of SharePoint. Now, the one little thing that I want to highlight about the demo that I've already set up is I've already set up my certificate authority, so I won't have to do that. Let's start off by going into IIS, so just simply start and IIS, and let's generate that request. So I'm going to go to my server right here. I'm going to go under my server certificates, and I'm going to click Create Certificate Request. Now, on this form here, the only part that's truly critical is the common name. That this common name must match the URL that we're going to be using inside of our website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up for central administration first. So I'm going to say centraladmin.geektrainer.com. Now, I've already created that URL inside of DNS, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. Now, the organization, the OU, the city, the state, the country doesn't matter for AD certificate services. But if you were going to be doing this with something public facing, then you'd want to make sure that this matches your company information, because one of the things that a public CA is going to do is they're going to do a little bit of a background check. So on my organization, I'm just going to put in Geek Trainer. My OU will say Geek Trainer. My city will say Chicago. And my city-state will say Illinois. And I'm going to click Next. And then it's going to ask me information about how I want the encryption to work. I'm okay with the defaults here, so I'm just going to hit OK, or Next, I suppose. And then it's going to ask me where I want the output file to be. So I'm just going to put this into :/, and let's say geektrainer.txt. It's just going to generate a text file for me. And we'll hit Finish. So now that we've got the request, the next step is to navigate to the CA's site. Now, in my case, the CA is going to be the name of the server /CERT SRV, since I'm using Active Directory Certificate Services. So I'm just going to bring up my browser here, and I'm going to navigate on over to https:// geektrainer.dc, since that's where my CA is, geektrainer.com /CERT SRV. And I'm going to hit enter. And now it's going to ask me if I want to generate my request, which I do. So I'm going to click Request a Certificate, and I'm going to use an advanced certificate request. And I'm going to do this by using that file that we just generated. So I'm going to click there, and it's going to ask me for the contents of the file, so I'll have to navigate to it. So I'm just going to go to my browser, we'll go to my C drive, and there's my little text file. We'll just open that up, and we'll copy the contents, and we'll come back to our browser here, and we'll paste those contents in. Now, this is going to be a web server certificate, so we'll just drop down, choose web server, and hit submit. Now, I'm going to get a little message saying, hey, are you sure you want to have this happen for you? And I'm going to say yes. And just like that, I'm going to get my certificate. Now I just need to download that certificate. And let's hit save. It'll just automatically throw that into our downloads directory for us. And let's head back to IIS. So we've created the request. Now we just need to upload our certificate, and we'll do that just by clicking Complete Certificate Request. Navigate to our little certificate file, and we'll give this a friendly name of centraladmin.geektrainer.com, and we'll hit OK. Now that we've got our certificate uploaded, I'm going to go into central administration first, get central admin all set, and then I'm going to double back and configure IIS. So I'm going to bring up my browser here, and we'll just head on over to http:// SharePoint 2013:4242, because that's where our central admin currently is. Let's go into Application Management and go to Configure Alternate Access Mappings. Now, what we've got from before is our normal alternate access mapping for our SharePoint site for central administration. So I'm just going to click that, and I'm just going to update that to say HTTPS, and then we'll say centraladmin.geektrainer.com:4242. So now I'm going to hit OK. Now, one of the little quirks that we're going to run into when we get into IIS is that we already have something on 4242. So what we're going to have to do is kind of play a little game of musical chairs. We'll have to just change the port number real quick, add in the new mapping, and then we'll kill the old one. So let's see how we're going to do that. So we'll just go into IIS here, and I'm going to go to my sites, and there's our central admin. And then over here on bindings is where I configure everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit this one real quick, and we'll just set a port number. We'll just add in another 4 at the end there, and we'll hit OK. And now I can add in what's going to become the good one. So we need to make sure this is going to be HTTPS. We're going to put this on 4242, and this is going to be centraladmin.geektrainer.com. And on my certificate, I'm going to choose that central admin certificate. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I can get rid of the other one. Say yes. And hit close. Cool. So now let's go back to our browser here. And let's navigate on over to https://centraladmin.geektrainer.com:4242. And we'll hit enter. Now, what you're going to notice, first of all, on the URL up top is that I now have a nifty little lock there. And that's my indication that we're now using SSL. What you would also notice is if I went to security, and inside of here, I clicked on Configure Managed Accounts, and I clicked Register Managed Account. Normally what would happen here is I would get a little error message, and the error message would tell me up at the very top that I'm not using SSL, and the information would be sent clear text. What you're now noticing is that message is gone because we're now using SSL. In fact, let's take this one step further. I'm going to bring up a new tab here, and I'm going to head on over to http://intranet.geektrainer.com. Now, if I click the little drop down and I choose sign out here, and then I hit the little drop down and I choose forms authentication, you're going to notice that I get a little warning right here telling me that the page is not encrypted. So my username and password are now going to go across in clear text. How do we fix this? Well, we fix this, of course, by using a certificate. So let's set up now our certificate for our intranet site. And this time, let's let IIS make the request for me. So let's go back to IIS here. Let's go back to our server, and let's go back to server certificates. This time, I'm going to click Create Domain Certificate. Now, once again, the only thing that matters here is just the common name. So I'm going to make sure that this matches intranet, geektrainer.com, my organization, my OU, my city, my state, and I'm going to click Next. And now it's going to ask me where my CA is. If I click Select, I'll actually automatically get the one for my domain. So we'll just choose that, And we'll give this a friendly name of intranet, geektrainer.com, and we'll hit finish. Now let's go in and set up our binding here. So I'm going to go to my intranet site. Let's go to bindings, and I'm going to hit add, and we'll choose HTTPS, and we'll give this a host name of intranet, geektrainer.com, and we'll choose our intranet certificate. We'll hit OK, and I'm going to say yes there, just telling me I've got a duplicate, and I'm OK with that. And now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that one there. And we'll say yes, and we'll hit close. Perfect. So now let's go back once again to Central Administration. And let's go to Application Management. Let's go to our alternate access mappings. And on our HTTP, we'll hit this, and I'm going to hit HTTPS. And we'll hit OK. So now let's go back to our last tab over here. Let's go ahead and navigate back to HTTPS, // geektrainer.com, and I'm going to hit enter. And now what you're going to notice is once again I've got the lock. I'm going to hit the little drop down, and I'm going to choose Forms Authentication. And now you'll notice that little message about this being unencrypted is now gone, because now we're using SSL, and now it's going to be encrypted. Let's close off our security conversation by talking a bit about firewalls. One of the biggest things to keep in mind about your network is that every system that's allowed to connect to it is a perimeter. Because what can wind up happening is my user could take a laptop home, get infected, come back into work, and bring their laptop with them, their infected laptop. And now it's going to try and spread everything throughout the entire network. The analogy that I always like is just imagine somebody with the flu. And this happens all the time. Somebody gets the flu, they know they're sick, they're showing all the symptoms, yet they still come into work, and now they wind up risking infecting everybody else. It's the exact same concept here, that somebody took their system home, they got infected, they bring it in, and now they wind up running the risk of infecting everybody else. And of course, again, just like the flu, somebody else gets infected, so they have the chance to infect other people and so forth. So if that infects, say, a server or another system, it then has the potential of infecting other systems. As a result, every system on your network must be treated as a perimeter. And thus, every system on your network needs a firewall to limit how people are able to communicate with it. Now, the catch, of course, is that while, yes, we are going to need firewalls, we do need to allow for communication to take place through our firewalls. Now, what you're going to notice is we've got a couple of very common ports that you do want to be familiar with. That, of course, if you're going to be doing web traffic, that's going to be ports 80 and 443. And if you're going to be allowing for SQL traffic, that's going to be ports 1433 and 1434. Oh, and by the way, for SharePoint, don't forget to open up your central administration port. There is server level security inside of SharePoint, and I will see you in the next lesson.